Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tangmen based on novel. So let's start. Bei Bei smiled as he waved at him. He pointed toward the west before pointing to the inside of Radiant City. After that, he waved to him again. Shusansha had known him for years, and thus he naturally knew what Bei Bei was telling him. He was asking him to escape first, and save Tang Yue in the future. Shusansha suddenly shouted hysterically, at the top of his voice as he glared at Bei Bei. Bei Bei, you homo. Now I know you truly love me. Bei Bei wanted to say something, but he chose to turn around and ignore him. At this point, the red light flashing from the Eye of Fear in the sky suddenly dimmed. A tragic scream sounded from afar, and a ball of bloody light shot into the sky. The bloody light, which was a mixture of red and white, scattered, and the Eye of Fear shook a little before it fell from the sky. The surrounding temperature started to fall significantly. Snowflakes started to drift in the air as the temperature dipped. The Soul Engineers didn't even have time to react before they realized that their bodies were starting to freeze. Shusansha was stunned. However, he was then delighted. He shouted at Bei Bei, "Little Junior is here." "It's Little Junior. Homo, quickly retract your powers. I'll follow you if you dare to die." At this point, Shusansha couldn't help but tear up, even though he was normally a very proud and resilient person. "Yes. Huo Yuhao is here." At this moment, Huo Yuhao's expression was so cold that he seemed like a devil king from hell. Purplish gold light shot out from his eyes. The spiritual undulations he released were very pure. However, they also seemed to have materialized. It was like two sharp, purplish gold blades had shot out from his eyes. Huo Yuhao was extremely terrifying in such a state. The little snow lady had already silently appeared behind him. She clasped her hands, her index and ring fingers slightly bent. She formed a weird hand gesture, before a blizzard started to rage forth from her body. Yes, it was the snowy dance of ultimate ice, formed from a combination of the third ultimate technique of the Snow Empress' 3 ultimate techniques, the Empress Chill, and Huo Yuhao's domain of perpetual ice. The terrifying blizzard raged as Huo Yuhao charged his way in. When Bei Bei's began to burn his life force, Huo Yuhao almost went crazy. Bei Bei wasn't just his eldest senior, but also his elder brother. He was even a father figure to Huo Yuhao. No one could replace Bei Bei in his heart. Seeing that his eldest senior had been forced to such a state, Huo Yuhao went entirely bonkers. The bloody light that had scattered earlier was in fact the brain matter of a Class 7 Soul Engineer. He was also the one controlling the Eye of Fear. Huo Yuhao managed to locate him using his immense spiritual power. After his spiritual cultivation reached the concrete material realm, this was his first time unleashing his spiritual shock using his Eye of Destiny with all his strength. Although the individual fighting strength and spiritual power of a Class 7 Soul Engineer was inferior to that of a 7-ringed Soul Sage, they were still considered very powerful. However, this Class 7 Soul Engineer's head was instantly blown apart by Huo Yuhao's spiritual shock, just like that. The snowy dance of ultimate ice was unleashed using the Haodong power, and it immediately covered a 300-meter area. The rest of the Soul Engineers that had dispersed were all instantly engulfed by the blizzard. Huo Yuhao's eyes flashed with purplish gold light once again. Bei Bei groaned, and the golden lights around his body started to scatter. The golden flames on his body also went out. His eyes closed and he collapsed to the ground. Once someone started to burn their life force, there was no way they could stop it themselves. Huo Yuhao had no choice but to strike him with his spiritual shock to stop him from burning more of his life force. With Bei Bei's cultivation and the combustion of his holy radiant dragon earlier, even an 8-ringed Soul Doluo couldn't possibly stop him. Huo Yuhao could only do so using his spiritual power. Even though Bei Bei was hurt, his life was still preserved. Huo Yuhao charged towards Bei Bei. Wang Donga mimicked a pressing action on Bei Bei's back, and the golden fire from her soul bone started to surround Bei Bei. He was temporarily shielded from the aura of ultimate ice as a result of this. "I'm freezing to death. Yuhao, I can't take it anymore." Shusanshi's tragic screams sounded from behind them. Huo Yuhao heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Bei Bei's life had been preserved. He quickly removed his domain and let go of Wang Donga's hand. He rushed to support Shusansha, who was staggering. Even though he was only in the snowy dance of ultimate ice for a short period of time, Shusansha had already turned pale. Although the origin energy of ultimate ice in Huo Yuhao's body had been bothering him, it had also enabled him to fully unleash the strength of his ultimate ice. At the same time, the little snow lady was slowly evolving. Although Huo Yuhao was still a Soul King, his fighting strength was increasing significantly. The biggest problem with the snowy dance of ultimate ice was its all-around, indiscriminate attack. At least, with Huo Yuhao's current abilities, he still couldn't control the strength of this domain effectively. He was unleashing the snowy dance of ultimate ice, not the fusion skill that both he and Wang Donga possessed. Huo Yuhao bent down and lifted Shusansha onto his back. He felt very fortunate right now. Fortunately, I created this human-shaped soul tool earlier. I'm getting some good use out of it now. If I hadn't made it, I wouldn't be able to save the two of them now. Huo Yuhao returned to Bei Bei's side after he lifted Shusansha up on his back. He used both his hands to carry Bei Bei and twisted his lips at Wang Donga before saying, "Let's go." Yi Gai was also shivering right now. When she saw the little snow lady appear, followed by the terrifying domain, she was completely speechless. She thought that Huo Yuhao was a freak. In addition, she could clearly see Huo Yuhao's soul rings experiencing changes as he unleashed his domain. 4 turned orange gold, while 1 turned red. Is he still a soul master? Is he even human? Huo Yuhao wasn't in a mood to comfort the shaken Yi Gai. Under Wang Donga's protection, he turned around and rushed westward. He unleashed his imitation again, distorting the light around them, and they vanished into their surroundings. "Get over here, quick. What are you doing?" Huo Yuhao shouted at Yi Gai. At this point, Yi Gai was quite some distance away from Huo Yuhao. Earlier, she had used her holy angel to resist the snowy dance of ultimate ice. She now watched as Huo Yuhao and the rest vanished before her eyes. She opened her eyes wide. He's actually able to cloak everyone. No wonder the troops couldn't discover us earlier. No wonder he wants me to stay within 10 meters of him. Under the guidance of Huo Yuhao's spiritual power, Yi Gai quickly rushed up to them. She shielded him from the side opposite Wang Donga as they charged westward. The aerial surveillance soul tools in the air had already discovered the tremendous changes that had happened on the ground. Deafening alarms started to ring out. Several figures appeared in the air after several seconds. The truly strong individuals of the Sun Moon Empire had arrived. However, their expressions changed when they saw the ice sculptures below. With the help of Wang Donga, Huo Yuhao's snowy dance of ultimate ice managed to reach the level of a soul sage. It was ultimate ice that was equivalent to the strength of a soul sage. How could those class 4 and 5 soul engineers possibly resist it? As a result, they lost their lives when they were frozen. Even their soul tools were covered in frost. "Where are they?" an elder asked a soul sage that was in charge of controlling the surveillance soul tools. "They are missing. Moja rushed here just now, but his head was blown apart by some special force." Moja was the soul sage who had controlled the Eye of Fear earlier. This soul engineer who controlled the surveillance soul tools was also a soul sage. Right now, he looked very dismal. His abilities were very similar to Moja's. If Moja couldn't resist that force, he wouldn't be able to do so either. If not for the fact that the elder was a class 8 soul engineer, he wouldn't dare to be here at all. Increase the detection range and use the soul power detectors. I don't believe they can escape. They must be using some ability to cloak themselves, the class 8 soul engineer shouted. The unsettled class 7 soul engineer nodded and immediately retrieved a huge soul tool from his storage type soul tool. He carried that soul tool on his back. It looked like a huge box. As he poured his soul power into it, intense soul power undulations started to rise. Following this, a thick metallic object started to rise from the box. After rising up 1.5 meters, the top of the box cracked open and formed an umbrella shape. A total of 7 metal frames around the metallic umbrella started to gather in the center towards a specific point. Soul power undulations were released, and the soul tool started to scan the ground around it. It was a class 6 soul power detector. It required the soul power of a 7-ringed soul sage to be used continuously over a large area. In addition, it couldn't be too far from the ground, so it was not to a high-altitude soul tool. However, just as he started activating this soul power detector, several bursts of sparks started to come from it. He and the other soul engineers around him were given a scare. They all looked down subconsciously. A terrifying, freezing tornado raged below them. Intense booms erupted in a circle and mixed with the icy mist that had just exploded before they merged into an enormous tornado that rocketed into the sky. This explosion was simply too frightening, as if the apocalyptic explosion that had just occurred in Radiant City was descending upon the city once more. Terrifying soul power undulations pushed the soul power detector to its limits, and it detonated with a protesting crack of metal. The soul engineers hurriedly soared into the sky, and even then, the extreme chill coming from beneath them made them shiver all over. This horrifying and tremendous explosion covered everything within 1,000 meters on the ground, and some structures that were still standing were instantly blown to smithereens. Fortunately, the soldiers and citizens in the region had already scattered, and not many lives were lost. However, this frightening explosion's force and impact was clearly similar to that of a titled Doluor's all-out attack. Huo Yuhao was meticulous and cautious. The more dangerous the situation, the calmer he was, and his judgments would still be accurate even if there were emotions stirring up his heart. Huo Yuhao had predicted that they would attract their enemy's attention when he hid with Bei Bei and Shusansha once more, and this was the reason why he opted to unleash his snowy dance of ultimate ice even though it would affect Shusansha at the same time. Otherwise, with the strength that he would have had if he had teamed up with Wang Donga to unleash mantra amidst the void, spiritual tempest, every single soul engineer on the scene would also have been eliminated. The soul engineers that had been frozen into ice statues became Huo Yuhao's timed explosive bombs for later, and his left hand was the most important entity that controlled these explosives and their detonations. Ice explosion was known as a godly skill of ultimate ice, and that claim wasn't without substance. With the proper prerequisites met, Huo Yuhao could become even more frightening than 7-ringed and 8-ringed soul masters in larger battles like this. This was the outcome even when Huo Yuhao didn't use his hands to activate ice explosion and detonate the soul power within these soul engineers' bodies directly. Otherwise, this explosion would have covered far more than just a kilometer. Its impact would probably have reached the various soul engineers in the sky. Huo Yuhao's face was cold and solemn as they soared through the air. He was carrying Bei Bei in his arms, Shusansha on his back, and his heart was full of peace and tranquility at this moment. Huo Yuhao didn't even look back when the deafening explosion erupted behind him. The huge army in front of them was shifting around, so Huo Yuhao and the others changed directions a little before they ran through the cracks between those soldiers, while Wang Donga and Yi Gai followed behind him. Bei Bei's breathing was weak, but his condition was stable, and all his vitals were normal. Shusanshi's breathing had become a lot more regular and normal after he took some time to rest and adjust himself. For some reason, Huo Yuhao suddenly thought of the White Tiger Duke's personal guards, who had jumped off the cliff for him before this. He suddenly understood why so many men chose to become soldiers, as only on the battlefield could they have that feeling where they were together in both life and in death, and only then could they feel the honor and glory of being valiant warriors. There had been a thought in his mind, and it was just a thought, but it grew and gestated like a seedling from the bottom of his heart. He had made up his mind. The three of them finally broke free from the Sun-Moon Empire's encirclement by zipping in between the gaps between the Sun-Moon Empire's army units with Huo Yuhao's imitation. Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection, which was shared with the others, and his imitation were the most important reasons why they could escape so easily. There were some flatlands in front of them, but Huo Yuhao chose to stop in his tracks at this moment. He frowned faintly, and turned towards Yi Gai with an awkward look on his face as he said, "Yi Gai, this place is considered safe for now. But if we continue towards the west, we will run into another kind of danger. We have to continue forward, but you don't have to. I can tell you everything about us now. I'm Huo Yuhao from Shrek Academy's inner courtyard, and she is Wang Donga. She's my girlfriend, and she's also from the inner courtyard. I don't have time to explain my abilities to you for now. You should know the Sun-Moon Empire's connection to the Holy Ghost Church, and you have also seen how powerful they are. There's no way for us to fight them by ourselves with our strength. If you are willing, you can join Shrek Academy. The Academy's doors will always be open to you, and your angel should be enough for the inner courtyard to make an exception to take you in." Wang Donga glanced at Huo Yuhao and gently touched his arm. Huo Yuhao had just introduced her to another pretty girl as his girlfriend, which proved how sweet he was to her. Yi Gai was taken aback when Huo Yuhao mentioned that he was from Shrek Academy. She knew of Shrek Academy, of course. As the #1 academy on the continent, there were probably not many who didn't know it. No wonder. No wonder he has so many strange abilities. He's actually from Shrek Academy. They hadn't known each other for very long, but for some reason, Yi Gai had an indescribable faith in Huo Yuhao, perhaps because Huo Yuhao had the chance to kill her a long time ago, but he didn't do it. Let me think about it, Yi Gai answered with a subtle frown. Huo Yuhao nodded and said, all right, I won't force you. But I believe that we will become allies in the future, since we share the same enemies. Shu Sanxia was still conscious, and right at this moment, the plain voice that had already traumatized them a little rang out once more in their ears. You have passed this deep adventure. The second test has been narrowly completed, so everyone can proceed to the third round Sincerity adventure. You may return. 4 faint gold and silver beams of light rose up from their bodies at the same time. Yi Gai looked on with widened eyes and a slack jaw, as all 4 of them vanished right before her eyes in an instant. Her body also drifted out from under the influence of Huo Yuhao's imitation. Yi Gai patted herself on the forehead. Her mind was already numb, as Huo Yuhao had given her too many shocks and surprises, to the point where she had gotten used to it. Should I go to Shrek Academy? I'll think about that after I leave this place. I'll circle around since I can't travel to the west. Golden rays flashed by one after another as the virtual world that they were in reverted to reality. Huo Yuhao, Wang Donga, Bei Bei, and Shu Sanxia appeared one after another in an entirely new environment. They seemed to be inside an enormous courtyard. The courtyard's boundaries couldn't be seen with the naked eye, and there was a golden sun and a silver moon hanging in the sky to show that they were still under the yin-yang love-querying valley's control. 4 gold and silver beams surged from beneath their feet. However, these rays of light were no longer arresting their strengths and abilities. Huo Yuhao could clearly feel that the soul power and spiritual power he had expended before this were being restored with incredible speed, and even the faint fatigue in his body vanished under the warm radiance. Bei Bei's reaction was the most conspicuous one. His body drifted away from Huo Yuhao's hands, and was gradually straightened while a dense mist nourished his body continuously. Huo Yuhao could tell at this point that everyone else who had disappeared before had reappeared in this place, except they didn't have mist around their bodies. Everyone was standing around in a circle, and everyone had a dome over them, as if they were trapped and couldn't leave. Everyone heaved deep sighs of relief as Huo Yuhao and the 3 others appeared before them, with the exception of Zhong Lishuan. Her pretty eyes flowed with worry and anxiety when she saw that Bei Bei was still unconscious. Shu Sanxia was the first to recover from his weakened state. He realized to his surprise that not only had his body recovered, but the old injuries that he had sustained from the tournament had also been healed. The yin-yang love-querying valley did have its mysterious and miraculous characteristics. Bei Bei finally regained consciousness after a little while. He opened his eyes and saw everyone around him, and he understood that he had passed the previous test. He turned around towards Huo Yuhao and squinted at him. Bei Bei didn't seem like he had just returned from the edge of death at all, and his classic scholarly disposition and his faint, amiable smile returned to him once more. His eyes unintentionally met the anxious look in Zhong Lishuan's eyes, and his expression froze a little. However, his eyes only carried a little more awkwardness, as if everything had become a little more complicated. Congratulations on passing your second test. After this, you will proceed to the last test, Sincerity adventure. If you can pass this test, you can leave, and you will be rewarded with something at my discretion. The Sincerity adventure doesn't have any limits or boundaries to what it may entail. Some of you may find your task easy, while others may find theirs exceptionally difficult. Everyone will face a different test. You will begin now. The borderless golden courtyard began to tremble violently, as that strange and peculiar voice rang out once more. All kinds of scenery glimmered into view, and every single one that was either familiar or novel rotated back and forth in the sky. Every scene that flashed and flowed by would produce waves of intense suction force. Finally, golden beams landed on all 13 people in the courtyard. They had no chance to resist those light beams at all, and everyone was taken away by those golden beams, one after another, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Huo Yuhao closed his eyes. He sensed the space that was twisting and contorting around him, and it made him dizzy, but he tried his best to regain his composure as much as possible. Huo Yuhao had now had his first experience in actual war after 2 deep adventures, and both episodes gave him a whole new perspective on everything. These experiences would be valuable for his growth if he could safely exit the yin-yang love-querying valley. Suddenly, Huo Yuhao's body trembled, and he felt as if he was standing on solid ground once more. He knew from his past experiences that he had arrived at the location where he was supposed to face his third test. However, he was a little confused when he opened his eyes, because the environment he was standing in now appeared exactly the same as it was before this. He was still inside a boundless golden courtyard. The only difference was that there was someone standing roughly 10 meters away from him. This person was covered in faint bluish golden light, and Huo Yuhao couldn't see him clearly at all. Huo Yuhao's instincts told him that this person was a man. "Hello, who are you? What's my third test?" Huo Yuhao asked calmly. Golden light flickered in his eyes as he spoke, and he immediately launched spiritual detection at this person. An encounter with a stranger in such a wide and open space meant this stranger was far more likely to be an enemy than a friend. However, Huo Yuhao's pupils began to contract in the next moment, because he realized to his surprise that his spiritual power couldn't sense this person's existence. He felt as if this person was formed from air. His spiritual detection reached over, but he wasn't blocked. Instead, he couldn't feel anything at all. This was the first time he had ever felt something like this since he had gained the use of spiritual detection. "This person is Huo Yuhao your name?" A calm and melodious man's voice traveled into his ears. The man's voice was a little surreal and dreamy, but he sounded warm and amiable. "Yes." Huo Yuhao gave a simple answer. He began to channel his soul power at the same time, so that he could keep himself in his peak condition, while his eye of destiny opened on his forehead. This unknown enemy was frightening, but Huo Yuhao could tell from his experience with the Yin-Yang Love Querying Valley's previous 2 tests that no matter how peculiar and mysterious this place was, the valley wouldn't give him a task that was actually impossible to complete. "Do you want to know who I am? Do you want to know what your third test, Sincerity Adventure, is about?" The man's melodious voice sounded a little amused. "Yes." Huo Yuhao continued to give simple answers. "First, I will tell you that I'm not the task for your third test. However, you have to fight me if you wish to continue to take your third test. Try everything you can to beat me." Huo Yuhao was momentarily stunned. He hadn't expected to find himself in such a situation. The man didn't explain anything at all, he only talked about fighting. Is this part of the third test? Or perhaps only a preface? Huo Yuhao didn't get much time to think before the figure opposite him suddenly moved. He felt like a bluish golden shadow had instantly appeared before him and pushed out a palm in his direction. This shadow didn't have any special aura, but Huo Yuhao realized that he felt weak and unable to do anything when this bluish golden shadow appeared. He was at a loss and disoriented, and he didn't know what he had to use to fight back against his opponent, because the man was like a ball of air, as if he didn't exist at all. The shadow's flickering bluish golden palm accurately planted itself onto Huo Yuhao's chest. In the next moment, Huo Yuhao felt a terrifying aura that pierced all the way into his heart and bones exploded inside his chest. In that moment, he could clearly hear all the bones in his body crackling like fireworks. The sound was horrifying. Hopelessness and death were all that was left. Huo Yuhao transformed into a blizzard of blood and flesh that scattered in all directions. However, pure white light suddenly erupted from where Huo Yuhao was originally standing at this moment. This white light transformed into a small 7-layered pagoda, which it rotated rapidly in mid-air before sucking Huo Yuhao's spirit inside. This pagoda trembled violently, as if it were trying to struggle out of this space. "Eh? That's interesting. You possess a strength that comes from a different dimension. He's quite a good teacher, what a pity." The same calm voice sounded a little surprised, and another layer of bluish golden light bore down from the sky in the next moment. The white pagoda instantly shattered, and a strange scene occurred afterwards. Uncountable specks of light swiftly congregated, and Huo Yuhao reappeared in this vast courtyard, after he had been shattered into pieces by that single palm strike, as if nothing had happened at all. Huo Yuhao died, his spirit was pulled back together, and he returned to life. That feeling of his body being broken into pieces and reassembled was deeply imprinted into Huo Yuhao's soul, and he experienced death, hopelessness, and extreme pain within those few short seconds. Huo Yuhao was completely lifeless and sluggish when his body reformed. However, his human-shaped soul tool that he had put in so much effort into crafting wasn't with him. Instead, it had been reassembled beside him. "I'll let you use your legs for now." That calm voice appeared once more, and Huo Yuhao realized afterwards that the ultimate ice origin energy of heaven and earth in his body seemed to have disappeared. He could suddenly feel his legs again. Huo Yuhao hadn't used his own legs to walk since he came back from the setting sun forest's ice-fire yin-yang well. He wasn't very used to suddenly being able to move once more, but he was still quite delighted. However, the same shadow that flickered with bluish-golden light appeared before him once more immediately afterwards. Huo Yuhao went through the exact same experience as before. His body was blown to smithereens, and his spirit drifted for a moment before he was reassembled again. I'm very disappointed in you. Have you lost even the courage to fight? There was a little reproach in that calm and melodious voice now. Huo Yuhao was rendered speechless. At this point, his body was normal, but his face was ghastly pale. He had gone from life to death and back to life, and it wasn't possible for his mentality to be normal and stable after all that. The bluish-golden shadow didn't attack him anymore. He placed his hands behind his back and just stood there quietly. It took Huo Yuhao several full minutes before he managed to stabilize and regulate his breathing, and his intensely beating heart settled down as well. He stared at this opponent that he couldn't possibly defeat as he suddenly gritted his teeth and bolted forward. Soul power circulated within his body as he attempted to unleash his goddess of light. But Huo Yuhao instantly discovered that he couldn't focus his spiritual power at all, let alone fuse it with his soul power. He couldn't even unleash a normal soul skill when he reached his opponent, let alone his self-invented soul skills. The only thing he could lash out with was his fists. The man waved his right hand, sweeping it onto Huo Yuhao's body as if he was swatting a fly. Huo Yuhao instantly crumbled to dust before he was reassembled once more. The bluish-golden figure was still standing there, motionless. Huo Yuhao grit his teeth tightly. His opponent was frighteningly powerful, and had even restrained and arrested Huo Yuhao's own abilities. How could he possibly defeat someone like this? How could he win? The agony of death and the insidiousness of being reborn, in addition to his spirit's vigorous ripples, dealt a heavy blow to his mind. Everything was just incredibly upsetting. He wanted to call the little snow lady. He wanted to summon the Sky Dream Iceworm and the Ice Empress. However, he couldn't establish any connection with his spiritual sea at all. The only thing he could rely on at this point seemed to be his own physical strength and pure soul power. Huo Yuhao's breathing gradually stabilized once more. He recovered a little faster than the previous time, but he no longer rushed blindly at his adversary. Instead, his brain worked rapidly as he sought to find a solution. I can't beat him. If I can't beat him, can I run? This thought had just appeared in Huo Yuhao's head when he turned to run, and he began to race away from the shadowy figure as fast as he could. However, he only took 3 steps before a palm slapped against his body once more, and he went through the same pain and suffering again. Huo Yuhao was reborn once more, and was panting vigorously while all that agony lingered in his mind. No, not like this. I can't run. Then what should I do? I can't run, and I can't defeat him. I can't even die. Does that mean I have to grind it out with him right here? No, that's not right. There must be a solution. The yin-yang love-querying valley wouldn't give me an impossible task. Huo Yuhao calmed himself once more before he started to ponder and think. He couldn't run, and that meant he had to face this challenge head-on. Right, what did he just say before this? He asked whether I still had the courage to fight. Does that mean that this round is testing my courage? Huo Yuhao suddenly raised his head as his train of thought stopped here. He stared vigorously at the bluish-golden figure in front of him, and then rocketed at his opponent once more. This time, Huo Yuhao had learned his lesson from his previous attempt, and was no longer affected by his inability to use soul skills. He mustered his soul power into his hands, and used the ghost shadow perplexing track at the same time. Just as he was about to rush right in front of his opponent, he suddenly sidestepped in a flash and slashed at the bluish-golden figure's waist with his hand. His opponent was incredibly quick. He pressed down with his right hand and slapped Huo Yuhao with his right hand, and Huo Yuhao's arm instantly vanished. The bluish-golden shadow kicked out and stomped Huo Yuhao in the chest, and he erupted into dust and particles once more. Huo Yuhao went through another round of rebirth, heavy panting, pain, and contemplation. He used 2 hits before he killed me this time. Then, what about the next round? Huo Yuhao darted forward yet again. He was stuck in this boundless courtyard, and was up against an invincible opponent. He knew that his only choice was to fight. The agony of death and rebirth seemed a little fainter than before, and wasn't so intense anymore. Therefore, Huo Yuhao recovered in the blink of an eye this time. He immediately charged at the bluish-golden figure once he recovered. Huo Yuhao could only use his ghost shadow perplexing track, mysterious jade hands, and controlling crane capturing dragon, as he gave everything he had to assault his opponent. As Huo Yuhao fought with his unknown adversary, everyone else started their respective rounds as well. Golden light flashed, and Dai Huobin was surprised to realize that he was now inside a vast forest. He was surrounded by plants he was a little unfamiliar with. Tall trees seemed to pierce right through the clouds. Dai Huobin couldn't even see beyond the treetops, they were so huge. The atmosphere around him felt a little eerie, and even the colors of the vegetation here were a little gloomy and ghostly. Dai Huobin unleashed his martial soul, the white tiger, as he surveyed his surroundings warily. Where is this place? What's this Sincerity adventure about? Right at this moment, an agonizing howl could be heard from not too far away. Lulu. Dai Huobin could no longer keep his cool when he heard this voice, and he raced in the direction this cry came from without hesitation. That voice belonged to Zhulu. He had been together with Zhulu for a long time, and they were thus very familiar with all those small details about one another. This video will end here.